How's it going, everybody? Today, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a review of War of the Spark. Now, today is Wednesday, the 24th, so the day before the set releases on Magic Arena, and the day after the streamer preview that I got to participate in. First off, big thanks to Wizards for hooking me up with that invitation and the preview account to play with all the cards beforehand. But today we're going to go ahead and go over some of the cards. Now, we're not going to go over everything. We'll go over the Mythics, the Rares, all the Planeswalkers, and then a few notable uncommons as well. And this review is going to be based on my experience with playing with some of the cards or being played or having the cards played against me. So just to kind of get an idea of what some of these guys are all about. So let's go ahead and get started here with the Mythics. So first off, Finale of Glory. Which is a sorcery, 2 white and X. Create X 2 white X 2/2 white soldier creature tokens with vigilance. Effects is 10 or more. Create 4 X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. I didn't get to play this card, and it wasn't played against me, but I can imagine that this is quite a powerful card. With one of the cards that we'll talk about here in a little bit, the new Nissa, this could potentially become a very powerful piece, and with the ability, but the thing is it's a little slow to potential board wipes, but it could be very powerful in the right circumstances. So I think this card, probably out of 5, I'd probably give it a 3. It's reasonable, but we'll have to see if the green and white token stack wants to play with this. They want a lot of mana to get to that X is 10 or greater, or if they end up playing like a Divine Visitation build for whatever reason, this could be pretty solid. Next one is Gideon Blackblade, which is a Planeswalker. Gideon, 1/2 white. Comes with 4 loyalty as long as it's your turn. He is a 4/4 human. Creature token with indestructible and is a Planeswalker still. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to Gideon Blackblade during your turn. +1 up to 1 other target creature you control gains your choice of Vigilance, Lifelink, or Indestructible until the end of turn. And -6 exile target non-land permanent. This Gideon is actually incredible. I played him in a black-white kind of like mid-range deck, and he did a lot of work. He's basically he's just a 4/4 beat stick, and he just gets in there and making your other guys have either lifelink, vigilance, or indestructible is relevant. I think he's going to be one to watch out for, potentially in like the mono white deck. He slots in there pretty nicely. He does have to compete with things like History of Benalia, but I think it itself is a very strong card, and we'll definitely see play. I'd give it probably a 4 out of 5. God Eternal Oketra. Legendary creature zombie god, 3 and 2 white for 3/6 double strike. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance, and when it dies, it goes or into exile. You can put it third from the top of your library. This got played against me, and it was very powerful. In a Mardu zombie deck, and yeah, it was just incredible. That's the only time I saw it though, but I could imagine that in it being the top end of a curve of some aggressive deck to just generate a lot of power very, very quickly. And it has kind of a nice inevitability, as do the rest of the gods, so they have a nice inevitability of being able to just come back in a few turns. And if you're playing any sort of card draw effects or anything like that, you will definitely be getting this guy back fairly quickly. So I give this probably a 4 out of 5. I think it can slot into the zombie archetype, which I believe is very strong, and then it's very good in just other creature decks. It may also find a home maybe in somewhere in a mono white deck, probably, but I think it's very good. Next, Finale of Revelation. 2 blue and X. So draw X cards, or X is 10 or more. Instead, shuffle your library, your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap 5 lands, and you had no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So kind of like a Time Twister or Time Spiral, kind of almost. Very sweet card. I haven't gotten to play with it, and nor was it played against me. I don't think anybody really wanted to try to find this or work with this card a whole lot during the event yesterday, but I think in a potential control shell it could be very strong, but I think there might just be better things to play. Just on the sheer power of it alone, I think I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5. Next, God Eternal Kefnet 2 and 2 blue for a 4/5 flyer. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn after you draw it, or as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy the card. You may cast the copy, and the copy costs 2 less, and it has the same God clause. This got played a lot against me, and I played a little bit with it during Grixis kind of control deck. This card's incredibly powerful if you can hit a card that is good. So, for example, hitting something like Enter the God Eternals is very strong, very, very powerful. So, and the thing that's kind of nice about this, too, is that if you, say, hit something like Finale of Revelation, for example, you copy that spell, and it costs 2 less. So you just get to... You can pay into it, and you get the benefit of having it cost 2 less a little bit, so you can get some more benefit out of it. I think this card is going to be great in control decks, so blue-white control, Grixis control, things of that nature, heavy spell-based decks. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. The one thing that I did notice that when I was playing against it a bunch, if you're able to just attack through it, which in some cases is not very difficult in this format, it seems. It's just a recurring blocker, but so it doesn't really net you a ton of advantage. But if you can stick it around for a turn, if you can untap with it, it can be very powerful. Next, Finale of Eternity, 2 black and X. Destroy up to 3 creatures with toughness X or less, where X if X is 10 or more, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This got played against me once in a black-green controlled, or a black-green like mid-range graveyard-centric deck, with just the standard Explore package and stuff. It was very strong. It was very powerful. And the thing that kind of enabled this card to go off a little bit more was the new Nissa and Yang Jangyu, the uncommon green planeswalker. So it was actually really strong. Whether or not a black deck is going to be able to get to that much mana quickly, unless it's specifically green-black, I don't know. So I think out of this one, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. We'll see whether it gets played or not. But I think it has the potential to get there. God Eternal Bontu, 3 and 2 black Menace. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of permanents, then draw that many cards and the God Clause, and it is a 5/6. I played this in that same black-white mid-range deck with Gideon. This card was awesome. It drew me into... So the thing that's kind of nice about the mid-range deck, it was kind of like a tokens deck as well. So like you were able to sack off your tokens, draw a bunch of cards, get a lot of value out of it. And I think that it can potentially slot into some decks that are similar... any deck that's probably going to maybe play Finale of Eternity would be great. And the thing that's nice about the God Clause is you don't have to put it third from the top of your library. You can leave it in your graveyard. So any deck that's going to play Finale of Eternity or a token-based decks, things where you have spare permanents to sack off, even sacking like a couple of random lands, if you can effectively, if your curve only stops at 5 or 6, you can sack down some of your extra lands to get value out of it. So that's how I used it, and it was really awesome. I think this is going to be a solid card. It probably won't be breaking the format, so I think it's going to be just a standard, pretty plain 4 out of 5. Liliana Dreadhorde General, 4 and 2 black for a 6 loyalty planeswalker, Liliana. Her static ability is whenever your creature you control dies, draw a card. +1, make a zombie, 2/2 black zombie. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures, and -9 when each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and then sacrifices the rest. This card was all over the place. At least I played with it a bunch, and some other people played with it quite a bit, and it was incredible. The static ability is insane. It doesn't say non-creature or non-token creature, so any creature you control that dies, you draw a card off of it. So having it in play with when you jam Bontu, sacking off your tokens, you're drawing cards off of it and you're getting value. Also, her +1 allows you to make creatures to block with. Protection is great. Her minus can potentially be backbreaking, and I think in this format where potentially we might see some things go the games swing more either tall rather than wide, or if they're swinging wide, you have the ability to kind of keep them at bay and keep them closer to 2 creatures, so her minus becomes a lot more impactful. I think she's incredible. I think she's going to be a staple of the format. A lot of people are comparing her to Elspeth, Sun's Champion, and I think that is a great comparison. It's pretty darn accurate, actually. But I think that she's even a little bit better than Elspeth. So I'm going to give her 5 out of 5. I think she's incredible. She's going to be a staple of the format. Now going into the red cards, Finale of Promise. X and 2 red, you may cast up to 1 target instant card and or up to 1 sorcery card from your graveyard with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost. And if a card cast this way, be put in your graveyard, exile instead. So it kind of gives you a flashback, if you will. If X is 10 or more, copy those spells. You may choose new targets for those copies. So this didn't get played at all. I didn't see it. I didn't try it at all. Thinking about what kind of spells are in this format, there's not a whole lot that I think that this could really be good for. I think this is more of a commander card than anything. I don't seeing a lot of play. I mean, the one thing that I've realized with some of these Finale cards is that even if you're not going for the 10, just getting incremental value could be decent. So this may slot into some kind of like the blue, and is it Phoenix deck somewhere, because you can cast it for 3 and get back a cantrip or something. But I don't see it seeing a lot of play right out the gates, and it probably will see a little experimentation, but not a whole lot. So I think I'm going to give it just a 2 out of 5 here. All right, next, Ilarg the Razebore. 3 and 2 red, trample, 6/6. When it enters, or when it attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step and has the God Clause. This card is insane. I played a lot with this, and I started to build a deck. I built a deck with this thing, a green-red deck with this. And just the ability to jam in some insanely large creatures. At first, it was like Impervious Slagworm or Great Worm or whatever, the 16/16 indestructible worm, which was crazy. And then it evolved over time into putting in Galta, putting in God Eternal Ronus. This card I think is going to be a major player in this format, and with things like Rhythm of the Wild and the old Domri from the first Ravnica set, or second Ravnica set, whichever one, giving it Riot or multiple instances of Riot makes it just an incredibly formidable threat, and it needs to be dealt with. And even if you give it haste, you just don't you need to have the removal open. So if your opponent can just quickly do something like turn 1 Elf, turn 2 Rhythm of the Wild, turn 3 Domri, turn 4 this, put in Aronas, you're dead. Like, just straight up, you're dead. I don't know that there's enough creatures in play. You can get enough creatures in play or enough power in play to make it happen, and you can't counter the spell on the way down because of Rhythm of the Wild, and you need to have a good piece of removal. So you need to have something like Vraska's Contempt or something, or Mortify up to be able to deal with this guy. But I didn't run into any of that yesterday, and this guy won me many of my games throughout the event. So this guy, 5 out of 5. I think he's going to be insane. He's going to be one of the first cards I play with tomorrow when the set goes live, for sure. Next, Finale of Devastation. 2 green and X. Search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. If X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X and gain haste until the end of turn. So this card is also insane. Now this is exactly the instance where I say that if you're not trying to go for the X and you just gain incremental value out of the card or just smaller value out of the card, now these Finale spells, they are still incredibly powerful. So this is essentially a Green Sun Zenith for 1 more green mana, and you get to look for your graveyard as well. You don't have to get from your library. And so one of the uses I found with this is if I was light on mana in the red-green deck, I would use it to get another Elf or an Incubation Druid. If I was at 7 mana, I'd get my Ilarg, and if I had like a big creature in hand, I'd just jam it and get there. And I never ever actually got to do the X is 10. X is 10 or less, which, I'm sure some decks will be able to utilize that, but just on the back of the fact that you can just get it, tutor a creature up, put it straight into play from your deck or graveyard is very, very powerful. And in tandem with things like Rhythm of the Wild, or, you just get a hasty threat. This card is nuts, absolutely nuts, and I think this is going to be another staple. The green deck's going to have some great tools this set to really work with. So this is a 5 out of 5 in my opinion, I think, as well. And then lastly for the green cards, God Eternal Ronus, 3 and 2 green for a 5/5 Death Toucher. And it says when it enters the battlefield, double the power of each creature you control until the end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance until the end of turn. What is insane is when you jam this thing, when you put this into play with Ilarg, the raise boar, and you get to double your power. So like you have a 7/7 boar or Ilarg with Rhythm of the Wild, or potential because if you have 2 instances of Riot, you can make it a 7/7 and give it haste, or it's a 6/6 with haste, and then you put this thing into play, and any other thing you're attacking with, it's double its power. So you're gonna hit for, you're going to hit for 12 at least with Ilarg, and then 5 from the Ronas. And with Shocklands being a thing in this format and people shocking themselves, it's very easy that you can kill your opponent on one swing when you put it into play. That being said, you can also Finale of Devastation this thing into play and then buff your entire team. So if you happen to have a Galta in play and you jam this thing, and then it's a monstrous beast. This card is awesome, insane. I think it's going to be sweet in the green decks. Any green deck, honestly. Green, white, green, red, Naya, all going to be insane. I think it's 5 out of 5. Definitely, potentially a staple of this format, and be on the lookout for this card for sure. Next up is multicolored cards. Nicol Bolas Dragon God. 3 black, a blue, and a red for Planeswalker. Nicol Bolas Dragon God has the loyalty abilities of all other Planeswalkers on the battlefield. It has 4 loyalty. +1, draw a card. Each opponent exiles a card from their hand or permanent they control. -3, destroy a creature or planeswalker. And -8, each opponent that does not control a legendary creature or a planeswalker loses the game. Man, this card is insane. This card is nuts. So I'll say this. On its own, it's a very medium planeswalker. It's only actually insane when you have either multiple planeswalkers in play, or if you have the board and hand advantage, basically. So it's just hard for people to deal with it. But it's very strong nonetheless. The one thing that was found out yesterday, which is insane, and this was the first deck I played against in the event yesterday, was a combo deck. It was a 4-color combo deck with this Jace Cunning Castaway. I know, which is weird to say, but Jace Cunning Castaway, this. And then Oath of Teferi, and it's a 3-card combo. So Oath of Teferi lets you activate your Planeswalker loyalty abilities twice. Jace Cunning Castaway is Jace Cunning Castaway. You only really need him for his abilities, because Nicol Bolas will gain all the abilities. But if you play Nicol Bolas with those 2 other cards in play, you tick up. God, why are people emailing me? You tick up Nicol Bolas. And let me do this. Close all these out here. There we go. Okay, so you tick up Nicol Bolas to 5, and then you gain all the loyalty abilities of all the other planeswalkers. So Jace's ultimate is -5, which means what it says is you get to put in, you make 2 non-legendary copies of Jace Cunning Castaway. So Nicol Bolas will make, when you activate it, will make 2 non-legendary copies of Nicol Bolas Dragon God. What that means is that then with each of those, you can take them up and then ult them again. So essentially, you can go infinite by making an infinite number of Nicol Bolas Dragon Gods. What this has, the implications of it is that when you're taking it up and you're +1ing, you're drawing a card, and then your opponent's exiling a creature or a permanent they control or something from their hand. Eventually, you get to a point where they don't have anything in play and nothing in their hand. And then there's another piece of the combo at the end. If they don't scoop, if they don't concede, you're going to draw, you can essentially draw your entire deck out of this. And there's one piece of the puzzle that we will talk about in a minute that gets you to winning the game. You eventually just ultimate it with just the Elder Spell. So you Elder Spell all your Nicol Bolas copies, and then you put it on a Nicol Bolas that hasn't activated its ability this turn, and then you ult the Nicol Bolas ult and win the game. Insane. It's very difficult to pull off, and I know that a lot of people were refining the lists as time went on yesterday during the event, and I saw a lot of really interesting ones. Oath of Kaya coming into play, kind of being a way to stave off aggression with being able to deal damage to stuff, gaining you life, kind of keeping you in the game as the game went on. So I'm curious to see where that deck list goes, but I think it could potentially be insane, and I'd love if that deck became a tier deck. It's going to be hard, though, because there are some very aggressive decks in this format, and things like Ilarg with Gronos and stuff. Like, you potentially can just get destroyed very quickly in the wrong matchup. So we'll have to see how that evolves. But definitely Nicol Bolas, I think, is a 5 out of 5. I mean, he's the big baddie of the set. He's kind of the one that has been hyped the most. Huge Planeswalker. Awesome. 5 out of 5. Next is Niv Mizzet Reborn. Wooburg for a 6/6 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that is exactly of those colors from among them and put the chosen cards in your hand and put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So basically, this lets you, at best, draw 10 cards for each of the color pairs, each of the guilds in Ravnica. I don't see this being a staple in Standard or even played in Standard for that matter. It's very difficult to get to work. The only place maybe that I could see it maybe making a splash somewhere is in a Gates deck. A Gates deck where now they're playing, potentially Planeswalkers. I mean, the thing that's kind of hard about that is that a lot of the good Gates Matters cards are monocolor. So you're very limited into your scope of what you can hit. I think this is more of a commander card for sure. But not anything in Standard. It might try to see some minor experimentation, but it's going to be nowhere near good enough, I don't believe. So I'm going to give it a 1 out of 5 for Standard, but I'd say probably a 4 out of 5 in Commander. Pretty strong, being able to access all the colors in that fashion, in that format. So, but yeah, 1 out of 5 in Standard. Rolesque Apex Hybrid, 2 green, white, and blue, 4/5 flying and trample. When it enters the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on another creature. When it dies, proliferate and then proliferate again. I mean, it's a solid mid-range threat. I think it's going to compete against Hydroid Traces for that matter. I don't know that there's a deck where this fits in alongside of it, but who knows? Being able to distribute +1/+1 counters on creatures is pretty powerful. And then just having the ability to just proliferate a bunch of times. If you have a couple of Planeswalkers, that's also very relevant. Maybe, we'll see. I think I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 because it's very underwhelming for me as a Mythic by comparison to what the rest of the format's doing or what the rest of the cards are. So I'm kind of light on it, but so 2 out of 5 for me. And then lastly here, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. So this is our buy a box promo for War of the Spark. 4 blue-black for 5 loyalty Tezzeret. Creatures and Planeswalker spells you control or you cast have affinity for artifacts, which means that they cost 1 less for each artifact you control. +2, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and you gain X life. -3, return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, and -8, exile the top 10 cards of your library. Put all artifact cards among them into the battlefield. So the ultimate's kind of like it could be relevant, but I think in this kind of deck where you're playing this, you're wanting to play cheap artifacts. You're not wanting to play anything that is incredibly expensive where you get like an insane benefit from the ultimate. The plus is crazy because the plus actually is the old Tezzeret Agent of Bolas ultimate. So basically you're just getting to drain your opponent out, every turn, with the number of artifacts you control. That being said, there is some combo potential with this card. Basically, this makes it so that your Karn the Great Creator is free. And then there's a card, Guardians of Koilos, which is a 5-mana creature. When it enters the battlefield, you may return a historic permanent you control to your hand. So essentially, you can loop those over and over and over and over if you have enough artifacts in play. And then with Sai, Master Thopterus, you eventually start to generate those artifacts because you actually create Thopters every time you cast an artifact spell. So you're just generating, making infinite Thopters. And then there's probably some other combo piece that I'm forgetting about. I mean, I guess you can just ultimate Tezzeret, or you plus Tezzeret, and then just kill your opponent on the spot. So, like, if you loop it enough times, you generate 20 artifacts. Or you generate enough artifacts plus to make 20 artifacts in play, and then you just kill your opponent. That's relevant. So Tezzerator's a thing. Esper Affinity I've seen is also kind of like an interesting deck. But I'm curious to see whether or not that, you're having to jam a bunch of like mediocre artifacts into your deck. So like, and maybe mediocre is not the right word, but like Fountain of Renewal. So you're just getting incremental life over time. Scrabbling Claws to kind of be a graveyard hate piece. You're definitely playing treasure maps to kind of dig for cards. Maybe you're playing Thematic Compass as a potential Mazavith. So things like that you could potentially be playing, but you have to be able to hold off the aggression, and you could potentially just die before you ever find your Tezzerets. and to get the combo going. So I'm kind of iffy on it, but I think it could be if the Tesserator list is figured out, and if they find a way to adapt to the format, it could be an all-star. I think for right now I'm going to leave it at a 3 out of 5. As much as I do love this Planeswalker and the ability to cast all your stuff a lot cheaper, and I love combos, so the combo potential, I'm going to leave it at a 3 out of 5 for now, just because it's kind of it's okay. The one thing I did want to kind of go over, I'm not going to go over these guys, the Planeswalker deck Planeswalkers, because they're just not great, but I did want to touch on some of these, the Japanese alternate art, the anime art ones. These are all super cool. If anybody's got any of these or wants to send them my way, I'd love them. All right, next, let's go over to the rares. Let's talk about those. All right, first off, Ignite the Beacon. 4 and a white. Instant. Search your library for 2 Planeswalkers, put them into your hand, and shuffle your library. So on paper, this card seems incredible. Being able to instant speed tutor our Planeswalkers to your hand seems very powerful. I tried to play this in Ross Miriam's he played it on Star versus Live, the Abzan Super Friends deck with Ignite the Beacon. And it was really good. It was really powerful. Whether or not it's going to make waves in this format, I don't think so. I think that there's just other things to be doing that might be a little better. But in a Super Friend centric deck where you're playing white and you have kind of the slot, if you have a couple slots available, which Abzan kind of seems to be like that color combination, they have some pretty premium removal pieces, but they need to be able, they don't really have a lot of draw, so they need to be able to dig for their cards or dig for their Planeswalkers. So having this in there would be great. So I think it's a 3 out of 5. It's a pretty average card for now. Whether it gets broken or not, who knows? We'll see. Next, Parhelia 2. So it's a vehicle. Vehicles make a return. 6 and 2 white for a 5/5 flying. First strike, Vigilance. Whenever Parhelia 2 attacks, create 2 white 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and Vigilance that are attacking, and it has crew 4. So I got Wombo comboed with this. On the surface, this card seems unplayable. It's just stone unplayable. Just because it's 8 mana. It's so much mana. And you need 4 to crew it. But I got Womboed with this card the other day, or yesterday. Alian Trazi, I was playing against him, and he was playing a green ramp deck, and he had Karn, the Great Creator. And so he tutored this out with Karn and got it into play. I was then able to deal with his Karn and his Nissa, but then he jammed another Karn, used Karn's Plus to animate it, make it an 8/8, flying first strike and Vigilance, and it attacked me down. So it attacked me for 16 damage. It was pretty crazy. So maybe it shows up in Karn, the Great Creator decks as a potential finisher. I mean, it's a powerful effect for sure. But unless you're having a ramp strategy that's going to allow you to get to 8 mana or cheat this into play somehow, it probably will not see play. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for that alone. Next, Ravnica War, Sorcery, Exile, Multicolor Permanents. Probably not seeing a whole lot of play. I mean, maybe it's something in sideboards against heavy Planeswalker decks or something like that, where, that Planeswalker combo deck where all of their permanents are multicolor. So maybe that works. Maybe that makes sense. I also saw some random... I've seen a lot of actually Primeval's Glorious Rebirth decks too, where it's, that seems to be an evolution of that list where they're using Ashiok to mill themselves and then Primeval Rebirth everything into play and then just win the game from there. So maybe this could see some sort of play. But again, if they're at the point where they Primal Rebirth everything into play, you've already lost the game. There's no way to interact, and unless you have that single land that lets you cast a spell at instant speed, or if you have a Teferi that lets you cast your sorceries at instant speed, this does not go anywhere. So 2 out of 5, maybe 1 out of 5. It's very fringe, if anything. Maybe 2 out of 5. It has some minor potential. All right, single combat. 3 and 2 white, sorcery. Each player chooses a creature or planeswalker to control, sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creatures or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. This is not a great card because it doesn't. It basically allows, you kind of set up to kind of be a single, one-on-one, but then you're at a point where you're not being able to do anything, and your opponent actually gets to do something first. So it's not great. 1 out of 5. I mean, yes, it's a piece of removal, but at the same time, we already have Cleansing Nova, so if we needed to deal with stuff, we could. Next, Tomic, Distinguished Advocist. Okay, 2 white, 2/3 flying. Lands on the battlefield and land cards in your graveyards cannot be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. This is a super fringe card. I don't see this being anything in standard anyways. I don't see it. Potentially, this actually has implications in Modern. Yeah, potentially has implications in like Modern or something, as a way to kind of stop War Prison from comboing you out with Ipnia Rivulet. But I don't see it in Standard. 1 out of 5. Doesn't do anything. All right, next, commence the end game. Instant 4 and 2 blue. Spell can't be countered. Draw 2 cards and amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So this is a super powerful spell. I'm realizing that over the course of the event, amass is not something that you really make a deck around. It is something that you include. There's very powerful cards that have amass tacked onto them, and so you work with them, and you just gain incremental advantage with your amass creatures. So this is super good in like a control shell where you just need to draw more cards. It's kind of like a mini Sphinx's Revelation. To some extent, you get some sort of effect. Like you can essentially say like the amass creature is potentially gaining you an undetermined amount of life because it can block. And then you just get to draw some cards. And it can't be countered, which is great. So I think this card's very good. I think it's going to slot in as like maybe a 1 of or 2 of in some control decks since it is kind of heavy on the mana cost, but it's pretty solid. I would give it a 4 out of 5. I think it's really good. Fibblethip, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Fibblethip. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. If it entered the battlefield, or if it was cast from your library, draw 2 cards. When it becomes the target of a spell, you shuffle it into its owner's library. So interestingly enough, the obvious home for this card is somewhere like is in a Vanifar deck. Whether or not Vanifar decks are going to be good remains to be seen. I don't think that they will be. It's as sad as I hate, as I love Vanifar decks, but I don't think it's going to be quite good enough. I did see this get played in that Primeval Glorious Rebirth deck with the Planeswalkers, just as a way to, it's just another creature, another thing to get back with Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. So he just draws you some cards. It's fine. 3 out of 5. I think it could be. It could be solid. It could be a 4 out of 5 in the right decks, but it's definitely 3 out of 5 in everywhere else. All right, next, Jace, Wilder Mysteries. 1 and triple blue. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game. +1, target player puts top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, draw a card. And -8, draw 7 cards. And if your library has no cards in it, then you win the game. So I played this in a blue-white mill shell, and it was good. It was fine. It drew me cards. It put cards in my opponent's graveyard. We actually won a few games by milling out our opponent. We never won by the Laboratory Maniac clause, but I think, with Psychic Corrosions and Drowned Secrets and stuff, you can get there pretty easily. I think the shell just needs to evolve to be able to adapt to the format with its specific pieces of removal and what it uses to trigger the draw spell, the Psychic Corrosion and the Drowned Secrets, because you need to play blue spells and you need to draw cards. So incrementally, you could draw cards over the course of the game for Psychic Corrosion, but at the same time, you could try to jumpstart that a bit with things like Commence the End Game, with Chemist's Insight, with Jace itself. I think he's fine. I don't think he's going to see a lot of play in a lot of other places, because a lot of the time you're either dead to combo or you're dead to creatures long before you can actually get your cards, the cards in your library, low enough to where you could potentially win the game with his passive, unless you're specifically trying to get there. So it's iffy. I think it's a 3 out of 5. It's a potentially just strong card overall. And if you're playing it just for the +1, just draw some cards, and to potentially make your opponent not have cards in their library anymore, to not hit answers or lands, it's fine. 3 out of 5 standard. Narset's Reversal, 2 blue for an instant. Copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You choose new copy for the targets. This only got played against me once, and I think it's an interesting card. Maybe it sees play somewhere in a control shell. Probably 3 out of 5. It's average. It's okay. Spark Double, it's an illusion. 3 and a blue. You can have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, and if it enters with an additional loyalty counter if it's a planeswalker, and if it's legendary, it's not legendary. So this has a lot of potential high potential upside with things like having 2 Teferis in play, or having my opponent the other day had 2 Domries in play, or having 2 Rals in play, or having 2 Jaces in play, or there's a lot of potential upside for this. At the same time, there's also a lot of potential upside to using this with something like Illarg, where you can have another Illarg in play, where you can put 2 creatures into play since it loses legendary. The copy loses legendary. It has a lot of high potential upside, but whether or not you want to be playing this in your deck, just taking up a slot in your deck, I don't know. I mean, maybe with Illarg, if you put this into play with Illarg and it comes in and copies some other big creature in play, like if you already have a Galta in play, I mean, it's a win more card at that point. And if you're playing this in like a control shell, then maybe you're coming in and having it being a second Nicobolus, or having it be a second Teferi, and at that point you're so far ahead. You're probably so far ahead that if your Teferi has stuck around, or your Nicobolus has stuck around for a turn, that it's probably not necessary. That being said, it is a cool card. I think it does have implications in Commander for sure, but who knows what it's going to do in Standard. I think it's a solid 3 out of 5 though. If it has the highest or very high potential upside to be able to be good, so that's where I'll put it. Bolas' Citadel, 3 and triple black, legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You play the top card of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost, and then tap, sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and each opponent loses 10 life. This card could be crazy. It's something that I have a feeling that it's going to be. So it's like a slightly better experimental frenzy. It is triple black, so it has to go in a specific shell. It's not super easily castable. But that being said, the thought initially was, how do we break it? How do you find the right combo pieces? What's the combo to make this happen? And maybe this is something where it slots into the Planeswalker deck, because it's already playing triple black anyways for Nicobolus, so maybe it has a home there in some way. And the combo overall, assuming that your life total is high enough, the combo overall is, 18 life. 5 for Nicobolus, 5 for Oath of Teferi, 5 for Nicobolus, 5 for Oath of Teferi, and 3 for Jace. So if you happen to just hit all 3 of those cards in a row, so it's that's 12 or 13 life, and then you just eventually at that point then draw into the Elder Spell and kill your opponent. So maybe, but I think it could potentially just be used as incremental advantage. If there's some other combo that's broken, that it doesn't require so much life, maybe it becomes there's a way for it to work. And it's definitely broken in older formats. Vintage, absolutely busted. You could get this thing out on turn 1 pretty darn easily, I think. So it was like Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, or Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and a Black Lotus. Like, you're just off to the races. So who knows? Who knows where we're at with this? I think it has high potential to be very powerful if the right combo comes about. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for now, just because from a standard perspective. As far as power level overall, it's 5 out of 5. It's insane. But as far as standard implications go, it's 3 out of 5. Command the Dreadhorde, 4 and 2, black for sorcery. Choose any number of target creature or planeswalker cards in graveyards. All graveyards, not just yours. Command the Dreadhorde deals damage to you equal to the converted mana cost of those cards. Total converted mana cost of those cards. Put them onto the battlefield under control. So it could be insane. Has very high potential upside if you have enough life to make it work. I've seen one of the self-mill decks use this, and they tried to get things like Lotless Giant into play to kill you that way, which was kind of cool. Definitely kind of cool. Now what's nice is that you can pick the number of creatures or planeswalkers you're getting back, so you don't just kill yourself, I guess, but you want to be able to get enough back to where the creatures or planeswalkers you get back have to have a high enough impact on the board to potentially to make the life investment worthwhile. It could be good. I think it's a 3 out of 5 for now. We'll have to see where it comes in to be broken or to be utilized for that matter, but I think it has potential to be used. It is kind of high on the mana cost, so it may not even get looked at all, but 3 out of 5 for now. Deliver Unto Evil, 2 and a black, sorcery. Choose the 4 target creature cards, or up to 4 target cards in your graveyard. If you control both Planeswalker, return those to your hand. Otherwise, an opponent chooses 2 of them. Leave the chosen cards in your graveyard and put the rest into your hand, and you exile it. So it's kind of like a Gifts Ungiven, sort of, a reverse Gifts Ungiven. I don't know where this fits in. I don't think it fits in anywhere, honestly. It's something where it feels like maybe it's like in a Grixis control shell or something like that, where you're picking, maybe you have 3 of the same card in there and you get to pick 3 and you just get to, get at least one of them back or something like that. I don't know exactly where this fits in there. I can't imagine any super crazy combo potential for this thing either. So I'm hesitant to give this a high rating. I think it's going to be probably it's like a 1 out of 5. It could be a 2 out of 5 if it sees sort of experimentation with some kind of fringe combo or something, but I don't think it's getting there. So it's 1 out of 5 for me. All right, Dreadhorde Invasion. 1 and a black for an enchantment. Beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and amass 1. And then whenever a zombie token you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink. I like this card a lot. I think it's super cool. It's not as good as Bitter Blossom. It's definitely strictly worse than Bitter Blossom because you're just making your one creature bigger. But that being said, if you're able to take advantage of getting rid of that, if you're able to attack a whole bunch into it, maybe make it bigger, and then you're able to sack it off to something like Bantu, or maybe a Priest of Forgotten Gods, it could be very strong. Just getting you a guy every turn. I think it's going to see play in the low to the ground, like Mardu zombie decks, or like the green-white or green-black like zombie decks, the green-black decks. I think it's 4 out of 5. Solid card. It will definitely see play. Okay, Massacre Girl, 3 and 2 black, 4/4 menace. When enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 till the end of turn. Whenever a creature dies, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until the end of turn. It's a very slow board wipe. It's something where you can put it into play, and maybe. So actually, the way I can I actually can see this kind of being used. So there's a card in Hearthstone called Lord Godfrey, which is when it, I think it's when it when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 to all creatures, or to all minions, and then if something dies, you repeat the process. So when this enters play, if you -1/-1 something and it dies, it triggers again. The second part of the ability triggers, and then it keeps going. So potentially, it could be a board wipe in the right circumstances. It's a little harder to get this to work in Magic because in Hearthstone, damage is retained on the creature through turns. So setting up, and also you have the ability to assign damage a little bit more controllably in Hearthstone. So it's easier to set something like that up. But this could be potentially solid in something like mono white, or against mono white, where like you're killing off a 1-drop, and then there's a 2-drop, and then there's a 3-drop, and you're just overall just killing off the entire board. Maybe as a sideboard card. I could see it being. I think it's a 2 out of 5. It depends on how the format shapes up. If the format's all controlled, then this thing doesn't do anything. But it could potentially be decent if it's an aggressive format. It actually is also, that being said, decent against Dreadhorde Butcher, which we will talk about here in a minute, because it makes it so that they lose power. So it counteracts the +1/+1 counters that it gets, and then it also makes it so it will have 0 power when it dies. So that is potentially pretty solid. If you're able to get to 5 mana against the Dreadhorde Butcher decks, then yeah, this is a snap include. So I guess it's a 2 out of 5 for now, and if it gets bigger, if the format shapes up to where Dreadhorde Butcher decks are powerful, then maybe this goes somewhere. Next, the Elder Spell, 2 black, sorcery. Destroy any number of target Planeswalkers. Choose a Planeswalker you control and put 2 loyalty counters on it for each Planeswalker destroyed this way. This is the combo piece that is used in the Planeswalker combo deck in the Nicol Bolas combo deck to play, or to ultimate it and win the game. You just destroy a bunch of your copies. Other implications, it's super sideboard fringe against control. If a deck that's non-control is able to play double black. Grixis probably likes this a lot if they're playing Nicol Bolas themselves, because they can very easily get away with killing a couple planeswalkers maybe, and then using the ultimate on Nicoballs to win the game. So it has potential upside. I'm going to leave it at a 3 out of 5 because it is a very powerful spell. And you just have the potential to just straight up win the game. So we'll see where it goes from there. But I think 3 out of 5 is good. Chandra, Fire Artisan, 2 and 2 red. 4 loyalty whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from Chandra, Fire Artisan. She deals that much damage to target opponent or planeswalker. +1, exile the top card of your library, you may play it this turn. And -7, exile the top 7 cards of your library, you may play them this turn. So the thing about this is that you still have to pay the mana cost for them. So I don't know that you ever want to necessarily ultimate Chandra. I can't think of a deck where she exactly fits in right away. She just gains you incremental advantage with her +1 and potentially with her passive ability. So, maybe she sees some play in some like bigger red deck. We saw the big red or the mid-range red deck that had all the artifacts and the Siege King commanders and stuff. So maybe she fits in there somewhere, kind of being like a little mini experimental frenzy, and the potential damage source to close out games. So we'll see where that could potentially be a place where she sees where she could be used. So I think she's a 2 out of 5 though. She's not really that great. She only gives you some minor incremental advantage, but and she only fits in very specific places. So I don't think she's going to go anywhere really. Next, Dreadhorde Arcanist, 1 out of red for a 1/3 with trample. When it attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana costs less than or equal to Dreadhorde Arcanist's power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If it would be put into graveyard, exile instead. So I saw this played once, and the only place I saw it played was in the Mardu Zombies deck, and this was used to a pretty decent effect, actually. So there was this, and then there was a Death Baron in play, so it had 2 power, so my opponent was able to attack and cast Angrath Rampage again for free from the graveyard, which was pretty good, actually, at the time. So I don't think it gets any better than that, though. It's super fringe with its ability. In the Zombie Tribal decks, which could be good, maybe it's probably a fit-in. It's probably an immediate include, just to be able to cast some of your easier, cheaper removal spells for free. I'll give it a 2 out of 5 because that's probably the only place I see it being used in. I don't see it getting buffed anyway or something like that. So, yeah, 2 out of 5 for sure. Krenko, 10 Street Kingpin, 2 in a red. And this 1/2, when it attacks, you put put a +1/+1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 goblin creature tokens equal to its power. This thing can kind of snowball out of hand pretty quickly, actually. I think it's actually pretty powerful. In a red deck where you have some potential burn removal to clear the way of blockers or stuff like that, you just start to gain advantage by putting goblins into play. I tried a deck with this in Bantu where I got like 8 to 9 goblins in play, and then played Bantu and sacked all the goblin tokens, and it drew me a bunch of cards, and it was pretty decent. That being said, I don't think that interaction is particularly that great on its own. It might need to be in somewhere else in more of like some kind of mid-rangey shell, like in a black-red mid-range shell, where you just have a bunch of better creatures to kind of bolster your damage a bit and not so heavily relying on it. But like, I think it's pretty good. I think it's gonna potentially see some play, and it will contend with Legion Warboss in the red decks for sure. So I think it's probably a 3 out of 5 for that. Mizium Tank. I'm not really going to go over to it too much. I don't think it's going to get played at all. Trample 3/2 for 3. When you cast a non-creature spell, it just becomes a creature with +1/+1. I don't see it being played. Not great. 1 out of 5. Naheb, Dreadhorde Captain, 2 and 2 red, 5/4. Trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, you may discard any number of cards. If you do, draw that many cards and add that much red mana to your mana pool. Until your end of your turn, you don't lose mana. This mana, the red mana specifically, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Maybe this goes in like the red mid-range deck. You probably are using it. You're probably just like cycling off some dead cards in your hand, and gaining some advantage that way. I think it's okay. It's a powerful card. It has very little downside, I think. You can choose to discard any number of cards. So you can keep like what good cards you have in your hand and then draw a whole new set. So I think it's pretty powerful. I think it's a 3 out of 5. It's pretty average, I think, for whether or not it's going to see playing standard. Sarkhan the Master List, 3 and 2 red for 5 loyalty. Sarkhan, whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. +1 until the end of turn, each planeswalker you control becomes a 4/4 red dragon and gains flying. And -3, create a dragon token. So I think this card's cool, actually. I tried to make it with a dragons list, and it didn't really work out too well. You just don't have enough dragons quick enough for the static ability to really be useful. But that being said, I did actually play this in a Gates deck with more planeswalkers. So there's things like Kasmina and Jace and Dovin, or not Jace, I'm sorry, Teferi and Dovin and Sarkhan, and he was actually able to turn my planeswalkers into creatures, and I attacked with them and killed my opponent with it. So I think it's super cool. I think it's very good. You play it, you make a dragon token at the right at the get-go to just protect yourself most of the time. If you have a bunch of planeswalkers in play already, you can play it and then make them attack, and you might be able to win the game off of it. Pretty powerful. And I think it fits into that gate deck kind of more specifically, just because you have things like Gates Ablaze to kind of clean the board up, and then when you play the Sarkhan, you get to have a red dragon that gets to block your whatever one creature your opponent's going to have. And then by the time your turn comes back around again, you're able to plus it and make a bunch of planeswalker dragons and attack. I think it's a very strong card, and it's going to see play in a couple of places. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for now, just because I think it is average. And until it becomes more, until it gets broken, until something that kind of fits the mold where your dragon, that one dragon creature token that you make, is good enough to just block whatever creature your opponent's playing. Like with the Gates Ablaze scenario, it's only going to be a 3 out of 5 for that. Awakening to the Vitu-Ghazi, 3 and 2 green, put 9 +1/+1 counters on a land. It becomes a legendary 0/0 elemental named the Vitu-Ghazi, and it's a land. I don't know that this is anything you really care to do all that much. I mean, maybe it's a closer or something, but it just is kind of lackluster. I mean, it's a land, so you can, the fact that it actually becomes legendary is relevant because you can't get cast down or anything like that, but there are other ways, I guess, around it. So, it's 2 out of 5. All right, Nissa, Who Shakes the World. So this was the Nissa that I was talking about. 3 and 2 green for 5 loyalty. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green mana to your mana pool. +1, put 3 +1/+1 counters on up to one target non-creature land you control and untap it. Becomes a 0/0 elemental with vigilance and haste. -8, you get an emblem with lands you control. Have indestructible. Search your library for any number of forest cards and put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. So, this card's cool. It's very good. In the decks where, I've seen it played in a few instances. In the combo potential, it's just used to generate a ton of mana. In the Aliontrazi deck that I played against. So it generates a ton of mana, which is cool. And then you use all that mana to cast a really big threat. I've also seen it in the mid-range shell, in a black-green mid-range shell with a bunch of other planeswalkers, Yang Jangu, and Vraskas and stuff, where you're using your lands as value, and you can kind of use your lands that way, even though you can 1/1, your opponent can 1/1 remove your lands. Because you're able to use a land to generate 2 mana, you're kind of like doubling up on it. And so if you're playing more of a mid-range shell, you don't necessarily need all that mana, so you can actively use your lands to attack and block profitably. That being said, it's very powerful. I think it fits in kind of very specific decks where you just want all that mana, or in that mid-range shell where there's a lot of potential other planeswalkers doing a lot of other powerful things to allow you to kind of really keep your lands as creatures and work with that and not necessarily be super threatened by it. I think it's a 4 out of 5. It's a very powerful card. I think it's going to see play this format. All right, Plain White Celebration. 5 and 3 or 2 green. Choose up to 4, or choose 4. You may choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 civilian creature that has all colors. Return target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. Proliferate or gain 4 life. So this is very similar to the the Confluence cycle, where you can pick 3 and you can choose the same one more than once if you'd like. It's a lot of mana though, and I don't think the effects are necessarily that great. I mean, maybe if you get to untap with a Planeswalker and you get to proliferate 4 times on the Planeswalker and then ult the Planeswalker, then maybe you get somewhere with it, but it's still 7 mana. It's so much mana to get anywhere with this thing. I see a world potentially where like maybe this is the option that you use if you're playing a Nissa, and then for whatever reason you're also playing Nicol Bolas in the deck, where like it's a 4-color Planeswalker, so it's 4-color minus white, and you're using a bunch of that to get there. You're not using Teferi, Oath of Teferi, or Jace Cutting Castaway. You're just proliferating a bunch to get Nicol Bolas up to 8 and then ult to win the game. The thing about that is that if you ult, you'll still have to deal with the Planeswalkers and Legendaries that your opponent will have to trigger the ultimate on Nicol Bolas. But I don't know. Maybe it works, but I don't think that that's really where you want to be with it. So this is a 1 out of 5 for me. It's so much mana. At least in Standard, it's a 1 out of 5. It's probably decent in Commander or something like that, but yeah, it's just way too much mana. Next, Vivian's Arcbow. Legendary artifact, 1 and a green. X, tap, discard a card. Look at the top X card of your library. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's kind of like Genesis Wave, a singular Genesis Wave. I didn't get to play with this, and nor did anybody play this card during the event yesterday, at least not that I saw. But I think it's a very powerful potential card, potentially very powerful. What's the effective cost that you want to pay into this thing? I think it's probably somewhere in the 6 mana range. So I mean, if you're investing 6 mana into playing this and you get to dig through cards to put things into play, what are the things you kind of want to put in with this? Maybe you're putting in Ronas, you're putting in Ilarg, you're putting in, I don't know, yeah, like Naheb or something. Like, there's some cards you could put in with this thing that make it reasonable. I mean, Carnage Tyrant and some of the older cards could be decent. I think it's a 3 out of 5 for now. It needs to find a home. I don't know where that home is. I know some people have been trying it in like Sultai decks and to just like small incrementally use it as like a mini wave to get things like Merfolk Branchwalkers or Jade Light Rangers into play on the cheap, or cheat them into play, I guess, if you will. But that being said, it needs to find a home. It's average for right now until it does. That could change as the format develops, but I think it's powerful enough to see play. Next, Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, 2 and a green. You may cast creatures as though they had flash. +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature gains vigilance and reach. And then -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile one of the cards face down and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. For as long as it remains in exile, you may look at that card and you may cast it if it's a creature. So thankfully, this makes it so you don't have to keep Vivian around to be able to cast that card. It will stay, as long as it's exiled, it'll stay there. And you can cast it and stuff. So that's kind of cool. I think this is it's pretty low to the ground, actually. So that's kind of nice. So that being said, I want to see it in some kind of like green-based mid-range deck. But that being said, I mean, in the green-based mid-range deck, there are other Planeswalkers that are doing things that are powerful that I want, or that I like more. So like things like Domri, I think I like more. It's okay though. 3 out of 5 is fine. I think it could be halfway decent. Being able to cast things with flashes is really powerful. So it could potentially just be pretty powerful, pretty strong. But I think until it finds a home and it finds a use, it's average. Karn the Great Creator, 4 mana. Activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control cannot be activated. And then +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target creature, an artifact becomes an artifact creature. Up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. -2, you choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile. Reveal that card and put it into your hand. 5 loyalty. So this card is great in older formats, where Stony Silence effects are relevant. That's not the case here. There's very few artifacts that are worthwhile in activating here in Standard right now. So for that purpose, for the passive, it's not great. But for the other pieces, if you're playing an artifact deck or you're playing a large artifact, which very few decks are playing very large artifacts, the +1 is negligible. But the -2 is the important one here, where you can basically tutor up silver bullets to deal with certain matchups in game 1 or in best of 1, for example. So being able to tutor up a Spyglass against control, blue-white control to hit it to fairies, or tutoring up to hit nicol boluses or something like that, Spyglasses, or if your opponent's going like very tall and you need to get something like a thematic compass to turn into a Maze of Ith to be able to stop that creature from really attacking you. Yeah, so things like that, it's reasonable. It definitely, again, like I said, it definitely has implications in other formats where you can tutor up better artifacts and you just get to also Stony Silence your opponent out of the game. Also, combo with Mycosynth Lattice. That's why that card spiked in price. Is that with Mycosynth Lattice and Karn, you could truly play a mud deck now where your opponent just can't do anything. You lock them hard out of the game. They can't cast spells because they can't activate their lands because it's and it doesn't see. And the thing is, it doesn't say unless they're mana abilities. It's just abilities. Period. So you can't your lands. If with a Mycosynth Lattice in play, your lands are no longer useful. You can't do anything. You have to attack with the creatures you have in play, and if you don't have creatures in play, you're locked out of the game. Period. So. In older formats, it's great. And the other thing with this is that it does combo, like I explained before, with the Guardians of Koilos and Tezzeret. So it's probably like okay for standard. It's probably like a 3 out of 5 for standard. It has its uses in standard, but it's definitely better in older formats. Ugin, the ineffable. 6 mana. Creature spells you cast cost 2 less. Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. +1, exile the top card of your library, face down, and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When that token leaves the battlefield, put the exile card in your hand, and -3 destroy a permanent that has one or more colors. So it comes in as a removal spell, a one-shot removal spell potentially. But that being said, it's actually very interesting that the card that you get is you're always going to get the card that you get with a +1, because it's whenever the token leaves the battlefield. So it can go back, get bounced to your hand, it can get exiled or whatever. You're always going to get the card. So that's kind of cool. But it's a 6 mana colorless creature or planeswalker that relies on colorless artifact or colorless spells, or that helps them. So like in standard, it probably doesn't have a lot of use realistically. It probably has some implications in Tron, maybe, where you're doing something like you're casting this on turn 3, but I guess there's other better things to do on turn 3. But then from there, you're just casting a bunch of small stuff. I don't know where I necessarily see this fitting and seeing a home. It's powerful in its own right, but I don't know where it goes. I don't see an immediate path for use with this card. So that being said, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 for now. Ajani the Great-Hearted, 2 white and green for 5. Creatures you control have vigilance. +1, gain 3 life. -2, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and a loyalty counter on each other planeswalker you control. Fits in the green-white, tokens or green-white mid-range go wide decks. Pretty strong. Giving your creatures vigilance is very powerful. Making them being able to attack and block is great. And if you have just naturally have other planeswalkers like Vivian or Nissa, you just get to plus and you get to put more loyalty counters on them, which is great. I think it's a 4 out of 5. We already have a strong green-white tokens deck in the format already, so maybe this is something that helps push it over the edge a little bit. But yeah, I think it's pretty good. Next, Bioessence Hydra. Bioessence Hydra is a 4/4 for 5, 3 green-blue trample. When enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each loyalty counter on planeswalkers you control. Whenever one or more loyalty counters are put on a planeswalker you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on Bioessence Hydra. It goes nowhere. This is a 1 out of 5. It doesn't do anything. It's just a Hydra. It's just your typical Hydra. You need planeswalkers in play, and so most likely you're not playing a whole ton of creatures. If you have a bunch of planeswalkers in play, if you try to get small incremental value, it's kind of average, and then it just dies. It's not legendary, so it can get cast down. So yeah, it's 1 out of 5. Not great. Casualties of War is a sorcery, 2 black and 2 green. Choose one or more, destroy target artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. Very versatile card. I think this is going to be great in. It goes in It's 6 mana. This is the thing. It's so much mana. And on 6 mana, I mean, I guess with this you can destroy a whole bunch of things. So maybe it takes up the slot of Vraska, or it goes alongside Vraska Relic Seeker. It's definitely a replacement for Vraska when that rotates out. But it's got to go in something like Sultai Control, Jund Control, something like that. Maybe even if there's some like black or some Golgari Control deck or something weird. It's a 3 out of 5 for now. I think it's very powerful and it has a potential place to be used, but it just needs to get to the point where this card is going to be used. I don't know where that is yet though. Domri, Anarch of Bolas, 3 mana, 1 green red. Creatures you control go +1/+0. +1, add a red or green. Creature spells you cast cannot be countered. Creature spells you cast this turn cannot be countered, which is good. And then target creature you control fights another creature you don't control. You're mostly using this for the +1 ability to make your creatures uncounterable. Whether or not this is as good as Rhythm of the Wild, because it also gives Riot and makes your creatures. So this in the 4 mana Domri is essentially Rhythm of the Wild. I think I'd rather play Rhythm of the Wild than this, just because it's an enchantment and maybe there's a huge focus on Planeswalkers this set, and so it's probably easier to stick the Rhythm of the Wild than it is to stick the Domri, or to keep the Domri around. 2 out of 5. Dreadhorde Butcher, black and a red, 1/1 with haste. Whenever Dreadhorde Butcher deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. This card is nuts. This card's a 5 out of 5. I'm just going to say it right now. It's super aggressive on 2, and it basically makes it... You can combo... I got combo killed turn 3 with this thing. So it was like this, and there's I think it's like Deeper Champion or something like that, where it's like a Merfolk or something that when you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1. And my opponent essentially just went like this guy, or no, maybe it wasn't. Maybe he didn't even have that. He just went this thing on 2, and then on 3 he just went Giant Growth, or Giant Growth, Mutagenic Growth, or not Mutagenic Growth, Giant Growth, and then Thud. So he made it a 10/10 and then thudded me with it. Insane. It just nutty, super nutty. 5 out of 5. It has it's great in the aggro decks with the zombie plan. It's great in just a black-red aggro deck in general. And then it can go into that Jund deck where you have all the potential pump spells and Thud to just kill your opponent super quick. So, yeah. It's fine. Great card. Enter the God Eternals. 2 blue and black. Sorcery. It deals 4 damage to a creature. You gain 4 life. Potentially gain 4 life. The target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into the graveyard, so you can mill yourself, and then you amass 4. Card is nuts. Great piece of removal. It deals with a lot of the format, and it gains you a lot of advantage. It gets you some life back against aggressive decks. It mills out some cards from your opponent or yourself if you need that, and it puts a blocker in play. Great card. 5 out of 5. Feather the Redeemed. 2 white and a red. 3/4 flyer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard. As it resolves, if you do, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. It's an interesting effect. It's a very unique effect, and I think that it has minor usages in Standard. It's probably just better in Commander. I have a friend who has been toiling around with this as a control-ish commander, like a Boros control commander, using things like Aurelia's Fury to essentially infinitely make it so your opponents can't cast non-creature spells or whatever. It's powerful. It's powerful. In Standard, it's a 2 out of 5 though. There might be some really random aggressive deck where you're playing things like Sure Strike to cantrip and draw a card, or anything like that. Maybe. Who knows? 2 out of 5. Living Twister, 2 red and green. 2/5, 1 in a red, discard a land, deals 2 damage to any target, and green, return a tapped land you control to its owner's hand. I don't know where this fits. It doesn't. It's a 1 out of 5. I think it's like super fringe combo, like with Boborig most kinda. You're having to play a lot of lands and draw spells and potentially a lot of ramp, and just it's weird. It's weird, man. 1 out of 5. Doesn't go anywhere. It's a decent blocker though. I'll say that. Oath of Kaya, 1 and a black and a white. When it enters the battlefield, deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. When an opponent attacks a planeswalker you control with 1 or more creatures, it deals 2 to that player, and you gain 2 life. So this is part of the planeswalker combo deck. That's initially, it's a good piece of removal to deal with creatures, and then it just gains you incremental life over the course of the game. Assumedly, your opponent is going to want to attack your planeswalkers, so it is decent to be able to kind of set up an early turn to deal with an early creature. Then you jam a planeswalker, and then you have potential removal or something like that to deal with it, and then you get to kind of protect your planeswalkers, or you gain some advantage for your planeswalkers getting attacked. Whether or not this finds a home anywhere else, I'm unsure, but it's pretty solid though. It's a 3 out of 5. Ral, Storm Conduit 2, blue, red. Whenever you cast a copy of an instant or sorcery spell, Ral deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. +1 or +2 is scry 1, and -2 is whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn. Copy it, and you may choose new targets for the copy, and it has foil loyalty. This is a combo piece. I'm sure that there are places where this could get, you could use this for incremental advantage, but it's a combo piece, and it's at its heart. You essentially just it goes in a Team of Reclamation deck where you jam this dude, and you cast a spell, any spell, or your opponent casts a spell, any spell, and then you retain priority essentially indefinitely, but you essentially are going to just use expansion, the expansion half of Expansion Explosion, to copy an infinite number of copy expansion over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. The spell is just to get something to trigger and give you a target for expansion the first time, and then you just copy expansion over and over, and then you ping your opponent out. I played against this deck. Day 9 played this yesterday on stream. I ran into him and played it. He played it, and things like Sorcerer Spyglass don't stop it because of the passive, the static ability. It's not an activated ability, so it just always happens, no matter what. So that's a cool combo. I like it a lot. It's if you want to play a Reclamation deck at all, is that something you want to do? Yeah, probably. It's technically a 2-card combo because you don't even have to cast the first spell yourself. You can cast cast expansion off your opponent's spell. You just need the Ral to stick in play, but essentially you just retain priority indefinitely and just copy expansion over and over again and kill your opponent. Pretty cool. Whether or not it sees play outside of that deck, and I guess depending on how strong the deck is, it's either a 3 or a 4. If that's the only deck it sees plays in, and that deck is kind of is like fringy, fringy, then it's 3. If that deck is a contender, then it's a 4. Role Reversal, 2 blue and red, sorcery exchange, control 2 target permanents that share a permanent type. Yeah. Maybe you get to gotcha your opponent, and you give them a creature token, and then you get their big dude or something. 1 out of 5. Better in like other commander formats and stuff too, but not non-standard, I don't think. Anyways, Solar Blaze, 2 red white sorcery. Each creature deals damage equal to itself equal to its power. Could be good. I don't know that there's a whole ton of like creatures that have higher toughness than they do power in the format for the most part. So that being said, I mean, this could just be a board wipe in the right deck, in some random Jeskai control deck, maybe. I mean, it doesn't necessarily fit again. It doesn't contend with any removal spells really in Jeskai. So, but it contends with things like Chemist's Insight. But like at that point, you already have things like Deafening Clarion, and then after this, after the 4 slot, you have 5, which you have Cleansing Nova and stuff. I mean, maybe it contends with Settle the Wreckage, and that's about it. It's okay. 3 out of 5. It's fine. Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord, 2 white, black, 4 loyalty. As long as it's your turn, creatures and planeswalkers you control have lifelink. Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. And -X, return a creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's a vampire in addition to its other types. So this card's sweet. I used it in that black-white mid-range deck with Gideon and the new Liliana, and it was just good. It incrementally gained me life over the course of the game. It basically killed a bunch of creatures and planeswalkers, or pinged my opponent down, and my Gideon got in for 4 damage every turn and gained me 4 life. And at the end of the game, I looked down at my life and I'm like, oh my god, I'm at like 50 life already. So that was cool. I think it goes in a very specific shell. It definitely goes where there's a lot of creatures. So maybe it finds a home in some like black-white aggressive deck or a black-white mid-range deck, and it just is good. It's just good. To take advantage of the minus is great. 4 out of 5. Solid card. Soul Diviner, blue and a black, 2/3. Tap, remove a counter from an artifact or a creature. Remove a counter from an artifact, creature, land, or planeswalker control, and draw a card. I'm kind of iffy on this card. A lot of people are saying that it's a good card, or they're kind of hyped about it. I don't know that I want to be removing counters from anything that I have, unless it's -1/-1 counters. Yeah, I don't know that I want to be doing that. 3 out of 5, I guess, because people are so hyped about it. I'm not really seeing it. I mean, I didn't get to play with it, so nah. I don't know, 3 out of 5. Storev, Devkarian Lich. Trample, when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, return to your hand target creature or planeswalker card that in your graveyard that wasn't put there this combat. It's really hard to get this thing used. Like, it needs to get through. The thing is, it needs to connect. So if it dies to like lava coils, and it dies to also the D-Spark. It dies to a bunch of stuff. Let's just say that. It's too slow, I think, honestly. It's 2 out of 5 for me. If you can get something back, then that it paid for itself, but I don't see it happening all that often. Tamiyo, Collective Tales, 2 blue and a green for 5. Loyalty. Spells and abilities your opponent's control cannot cause you to discard or sacrifice permanents. Choose a non-land card name. Then reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all cards with the chosen name from among them into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. -3, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's a regrowth. It's not great. I mean, it's really slow on the discard stuff. I don't know if there's really a place where this really, really fits in. The sacrificing is actually interesting. It could maybe have some kind of usage in like other formats where like sacrificing effects are more prevalent, but like I don't think it's seeing a lot of play here in standard. 2 out of 5. All right, coming to the end of the rares here. Thankfully, we're almost done with this. Teferi, Time Raveler, 1 white and a blue for 4 mana, or for 4 loyalty. Each opponent can only cast spells anytime they can cast a sorcery. +1, until the end of your next turn, you may cast a sorcery spell, or you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. -3, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. This card's sweet. This card's great. I think it's going to have a lot of usage. It's going to see a lot of play. It basically makes your opponent can't counter any of your spells. They can't cast anything on your turn, so you're free to do as you please. This is seeing play in that Teferi or in the Planeswalker control deck to basically make it so your opponent can't counter anything you do or remove any of your Planeswalkers on your turn when you try to go off. And then being able to cast your sorceries with flash is cool. Being able to like instant speed Kaya's Wrath your opponent off the game or out of the game, which is pretty interesting. It's pretty sweet. And then return up to 1. The -3 is good. I mean, it draws you a card and you get to kind of deal with something problematic, only temporarily though. I mean, I guess you kind of like time walk your opponent on 3 if they like go like turn 2 search for Escanta, and then turn 3 you play this and bounce the search for Escanta and draw a card. That's pretty good. Or if they go like turn 3 Chromatic Lantern, which is starting to see a lot more play nowadays. Bounce your Chromatic Lantern, make them have to replay it. Could be decent. I like this card a lot. I think it's a 5 out of 5. I think this is very powerful. It's going to go in the blue-eye control decks. It's going to go in the Planeswalker combo decks and the control decks and stuff. I think it's great. It's very powerful. Time Wipe. 2 blue and 2 white and a blue. Return a creature you control to its owner's hand and destroy all creatures. So it's like if you're going tall or if you have like one creature that you have suited up, or you have one creature that you need to keep in play for some reason, and then you have to blow up the rest of the board. It's 5 mana. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Maybe you play it over Cleansing Nova when you want to go and say save your Lyra. You bounce it to your hand, and then you blow up the rest of the board, and then you get to replay your Lyra next turn. It seems okay. Whether or not maybe it sees play or something in a sideboard of the blue-white control deck because you need to have a creature, and usually the blue-white control decks don't play a lot of creatures in the main deck, so probably a sideboard card, if anything. 3 out of 5. Decent card. Tolsimir. 2 green, green, and white. When it enters, you make Voja, Friend of Elves, and then you get to have it whenever a wolf enters play, which presumably in Standard it's mostly this. You're probably not playing the other wolf that goes with Tolsimir. Or the Arlen's wolf. Arlen has a wolf. You're not playing that wolf most likely. So whenever Voja enters the battlefield, you have it fight something and you gain 3 life. It's a limited bomb. It's not going to see play in Standard. 2 out of 5. Widespread Vitality, 1 black and 2 red. Amass 2, then the army you amass deals damage equal to its power to each non-army creature. Could be great in a Grixis control shell alongside things like Enter the God Eternals where you amass 4 and then you amass 2, so you get to deal 6 to everything. At worst, it's a Pyroclasm. At best, you wipe the board. Pretty much. Whether or not this sees play in the Grixis, whether or not this is going to see a ton of play, remains to be seen. I think, in all honesty, maybe it sees like random play in like the Mardu Zombies deck because there's some random upside because there are creatures that when they die you amass. So like if you go and like you have an amass zombie already and then you amass 2 and you say like you have like a 3 power zombie or army and then you blow up the board and then all your guys that died amass and make your zombie bigger and then you attack with it. Yeah, maybe I could see it. Could be decent. I think it's still a very powerful card, though. 4 out of 5. Blast Zone. So kind of like an Engineered Explosive Right? Yeah, Engineered Explosive. Enters with a charge counter. Taps for colorless mana. And then you have to pay X, and put X charge counters on it. And then you sacrifice it, pay 3, tap and sacrifice it, and destroy each online permanent with given mana cost. Equal to the number of charge counters on it, so it's like explosives or the other bomb, ratchet bomb, kind of. It's good. I mean, it's fine in the control shell. I think it's something where, it's played in control where you don't have a lot of commitment to the board in terms of permanence, and you can put this thing on 1 already. It just comes in as 1, and then you can blow up a bunch of 1-drops, or you can blow up a bunch of 2-drops. 2-drops if you take it up. The only place actually I might see, and that being said, I can go back to Soul Diviner. If your opponent has a bunch of tokens, you can tap this and remove your charge counter from this thing to make it 0, and then blow up all the tokens in play. Yeah, maybe, but are you wanting to play Soul Diviner in a control deck? I don't think so. Blast Zone's sweet though. I think it's a 3 out of 5. It fits in very specific places. Karn's Bastion adds a colorless and 4 and proliferate. 4 out of 5. Straight up. Very simple card, but it allows you to proliferate in the Planeswalker decks every turn or in control decks every turn. If you're playing 2-color controls or blue-white control, this fits in. If you're playing Esper or something like that, it's a little harder just because you have such heavy tax on your mana because you're playing things like Kaya's Wrath. So you don't want to necessarily play a colorless land all that much, but it's still pretty decent. I think it's going to be seeing play in places for sure. Proliferate's a very powerful effect, especially with all these Planeswalkers. So 4 out of 5 there. And Mobilized District taps for colorless, and then 4 it becomes a 3/3 citizen creature with vigilance, and then it costs 1 less for each legendary creature and Planeswalker you control. I don't see this seeing play at all. You have better things to do with your mana than make a 3/3. 1 out of 5. These are the rest of the rare Planeswalkers. The Japanese are rare Planeswalkers, so there's some really cool ones here. Vivian, Nissa. I think probably my favorite ones are those, and then Tamio. Those 3 are kind of like, those 3 are my favorite ones there. So yeah, these are sweet, man. These are super cool. Okay, and next we're gonna go to the uncommons, and we're gonna talk about the Planeswalkers and then a few notable uncommons. So first off is gonna be Teo, Shield Mage. 3 mana, 5 loyalty of Hexproof, and then make a wall. Having Hexproof is powerful. And if you play it in the right deck where you can kind of protect it and you can just always have Hexproof, it's great. I think it's a 3 out of 5. Wanderer is a 4 mana, 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Prevent all non-combat damage that we dealt to you and other permanents you control. And then exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Now that being said though, this is an interesting thing I didn't think about. If you have the Wanderer in play, I don't know if the Wanderer, if you have a duplicate of the Wanderer, so like if you use the the rare to duplicate it in some like blue-white deck, do you just lock out your opponent from being able to cast spells that target you? I don't know if that's actually the case because it says other things, other permanents you control. So technically they should see each other. It's kind of like the two Drogskull Captains thing where like if you have two of the permanents that give each other hexproof, then your opponent can't cast spells that target your stuff. So maybe this sees play somewhere. Maybe like I don't know. It's interesting. But I don't think it sees a lot of play anywhere. I think it's just a solid 3 out of 5. Maybe 2 out of 5. We know Augur Bolus reprint. Look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them on the bottom of your deck. Kasmina, Enigmatic Mentor. Spells your opponent's cast to target creature or planeswalker you control costs 2 more to cast, and then you make a wizard draw card and then loot. Or draw a card and discard a card. This card's awesome, I think. I played it a lot over the course of the day yesterday, and it's nice to just have incremental taxing effects, and then being able to loot is nice as well. I think it's a 3 out of 5. It's solid. It's going to see play in places for sure. Yeah, just the taxing effect is great. Narset, Part of the Veil, is 3 mana for 5 loyalty. Each player or each opponent cannot draw more than 1 card per turn. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom. It's a sideboard card against control, probably. In the mirror match, where you just like make your opponent can't draw a bunch of cards. With things like enter or commence the end game. 3 out of 5. It's okay. Maybe 2 out of 5. Davriel, 2 and a black at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, or of each opponent's upkeep. If that player has one or fewer cards in hand, it deals 2 damage to them, and then they make them discard a card. I don't know. There have been talks about this in other formats as additional rack effects, but not in standard. I don't think there's enough to go about to make this really useful, honestly. I mean, maybe it's good against, like... it's not even that good. 2 out of 5. Okay, on next list is the Hate Twisted. 5 mana for 5 loyalty. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Ob deals 1 damage to that player, and then you destroy a creature, and its controller draws 2 cards. So you can target your own stuff with this. If you need cards, you can technically draw, or you can kill like your own token and draw a card. It's incremental damage that's not really that great. So it's a 2 out of 5. I don't think it really sees a lot of play anywhere. It's not on 5 mana. There's a lot of other things you want as well. Price of Betrayal is one of those uncommons I wanted to talk about. It's a pretty good piece of removal. So like it's 1 black mana. It's a sorcery, yes, but you can basically sideboard this to kill planeswalkers if planeswalkers become heavy. Being able, like, if you played an Esper or something like that, and you can use Teferi to make you be able to cast sorceries at instant speed. You can cast this and like kill a Nicobolas or something like that before they get a chance to really do anything with it or whatever. But that's pretty good. I think that's pretty sweet. I think this card is a 3 out of 5. It's decent enough to see play in sideboards, I think. It should the meta shape up to be that way. Vraska Swarm's Eminence, 2 and 2 black-green hybrid mana for 5 mana, or for 5 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals damage to a player or planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, -2. Create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch. And then it has the Death Touch to planeswalkers clause. It's Death Touch to planeswalkers as well. 2 out of 5. It's not great. It's not going to see play, I don't think, anywhere really. Jaya Venerated Fire Mage, 5 mana for 5 loyalty. If another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent player, deals that much +1 to that permanent instead, and then -2, it deals 2 to any target. It might see play in some like red deck, but it costs 5 mana, so I don't know that I'm like super high on it. 2 out of 5. Tybalt. Other Man the Myth Legend, he's back. 3 mana for 5 loyalty. Your opponents can't gain life, and then -2 make a 1/1 that when it dies it deals 1 damage to any target. It doesn't do enough. I guess if some like life gain deck is relevant, maybe this is a thing that sees play, but it only has 5. And most likely if it's a life gain deck, it's either red-white or black-white, or maybe mono-white, and then they just have a way to remove this thing. So it's not that great.
or they just attack it, right? So like, yeah, I don't see this seeing play at all. 1 out of 5. Arlan, Voice of the Pact, for 2 green, 7 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control that is a wolf or a werewolf enters the battlefield, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter. It's pretty good. -2, make a wolf. 6 mana is a lot for this, and I don't know that there's enough wolf synergy to make it work, at least now. Probably in some other format, in like Commander, maybe it's probably decent, but in Standard, I don't see it. Probably it's just a 1 out of 5. Another one here I want to talk about, Evolution Sage. 2 and a green, 3/2, and it basically is landfall proliferate. That's pretty insane. In a mid-range deck, in a Golgari mid-range deck where you have the Explorer package and you have things like Wild Growth Walker, Jade Light Ranger, and Merfolk Branch Walker, you just proliferate and those things get really, really big. So this card's insane, I think, in those specific decks where you want to have just like a bunch of +1/+1 counters on creatures. So I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. I think it definitely is going to see play in those kinds of decks. And it's super sweet. Yeah, totally awesome. Jang Yangu, Wildcrafter, 3 mana for 3 loyalty. Each creature with a +1/+1 counter you control, or each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has tap, add 1 mana of any color. So it's a birds. -1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This card is also incredible. This card has been, it goes into that same kind of deck with Evolution Stage where you're just playing a bunch of mid-rangey dorks where you're, or like earlier to like mid-rangey creatures with Explorer, Path of Discovery, and all that stuff. So you just get to like put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on stuff, and then you just generate a bunch of mana to then do a finale of the black one, finale. And then you blow up all the board, and then you put all your creatures back again, and then you get to explore again a bunch. So that's super cool. I think this card's also good. I've seen it in a lot of places, so I think this is a 4 out of 5. This is going to be one of those that sees play in the creature decks. One of the other spells here, Angrass Rampage. This card's insane. Black, red, choose one. Target player sacrifices an artifact, a creature, or a planeswalker. So you get to pick one of those things. And early enough, it's low of enough cost that it's early enough that you can make it so that your opponents sack whatever. Well, you get to kill whatever you want, essentially. It's bad, obviously, against the go wide decks where they're generating more than 1 token every turn or more than 1 creature every turn. But then against like mid-range decks where they're putting 1 creature in play or they're putting a planeswalker in play, this card's insane. This card's a 5 out of 5. This card's so good. D-Spark. I actually say this is 4 out of 5. It has some potential downside, but it's like 4.5. It's so close to 5. Cruel Element's cool. It goes in the Aristocrat deck. It's kind of just like it's another drain effect, which is great. I like that. D-Spark is a great removal spell. So black and a white. Exile a permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. So this is cool and allows you to kill some big things. It's cool. It's good. It'll be in the sideboards of control decks, and it'll be maybe a mainstay in some like black-white mid-range decks where you needed to just deal with something bigger than what you have. Yeah, decent card. Probably this is like a 3 out of 5. Dovin's Veto, black and a white and a blue for an instant, can't be countered, negate, uncounterable negate. 4 out of 5 gets played in the blue-white control decks or any like Esper control decks, maybe Jeskai control. Pretty sweet. I think it's a good card. Moving down here, nothing too crazy as far as any of these are concerned. So now we're going to talk about the Planeswalkers here, these last few ones here. Angrath, Captain of Chaos, so 2 and 2 blue or black red hybrid mana for 5 loyalty. -2, amass 2, which is pretty sweet. But then creatures you control have menace. So this is pretty good in like a mid-range shell where you just have a bunch of creatures attacking. I can see this potentially seeing play as like a 3 out of 5. Ashiok Dreamrender, 1 and a 2 blue-black hybrid mana for 5 loyalty. Spells and abilities your opponents control cannot cause their controllers to search their libraries. How relevant this is right now in Standard is not crazy. I don't think there's a ton of relevance here. The big thing is that you can target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard and then exile each opponent's graveyard, which is crazy. So essentially you can use this to mill out yourself and then deal with an opponent's graveyard. You can mill your opponent's graveyard, and then if they hit something interesting, you just exile it. Which is cool. I'm a fan of this. A lot. 4 out of 5. I think this sees play in a bunch of places as time goes on here. Dovin, Hand of Control, 2 colorless and an Azorius hybrid for 5. Artifact, instants, and sorceries your opponent's control or your cast cost 1 more to cast, and then you get to basically fog 1 thing on your opponent's board until your next turn, which is good. I like it. It's more taxing effects, and it goes in specific decks where you want the taxing effects. You need to keep your Planeswalkers in play or something. It goes against control. I think it's a 3 out of 5. It's not quite as good as like Kasmina, I don't think, but in tandem with Kasmina, it's quite good. Huatli, Sun's Heart, 2 and a Selesnya hybrid for 7 loyalty. Each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, and then -3, you gain life equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. In Standard, it's not probably that great. It's better in other places, in Commander and stuff like that. It's probably like a 2 out of 5, maybe somewhere somebody finds a way to make it work, but yeah, it's not. I'm not seeing it too much. Kaya, Bane of the Dead, 3 colorless and 3 Orzhov hybrid mana for 7 loyalty. Your opponent's impermanence, your opponent's control with hexproof can be the targets of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. And then -3 exile target creature. So this is a cool one-shot removal. It's basically anti-Carnage Tyrant. I don't think that there's a ton of extra hexproofy things in the format where the static ability really matters all that much. But that being said, I don't see this mattering a whole ton either. This is probably some like one-off sideboard card that is probably used in some control deck or something, or a mid-range deck where you have to deal with Carnage Turn or something. If Hexproof gets big, it gets better. It's a 2 out of 5 for me. It's not amazing, but it has potential to be played in maybe some small places depending on the meta. Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner, 2 and a Simic hybrid, mana for 7 loyalty. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, and -1 on tap target permanent. I actually really like this card a lot. I think so. This is going to go in the Vannifar deck, and it's going to go. I played it in like a Teamer deck, in a Teamer Vannifar deck, but I never found Vannifar in the like 5 or 6 games I played with the deck. I never found Vannifar, but I did find Illarg, and Illarg makes you draw a card, which is pretty cool. So it could see some play somewhere. It's probably decent enough in the Simic deck as a whole, and maybe it sees play somewhere, but it's a kind of a lackluster minus effect. But I guess being able to untap a creature to be a blocker on defense is decent as well. So 3 out of 5, I think it's decent. Nahiri, Stormstone, 2 and 2 Boros hybrid mana for 6. As long as your turn creatures you control have first strike and equip costs, you activate cost 1 once to cast. -X, it deals X damage to a target tapped creature. The passive ability is just never going to get used in Standard at all. I don't see it ever happening unless equipment in the next set maybe become a big thing. Maybe. But I don't really see it. And the tapped creature clause is the same thing as like Castaway or Cast Down or Seal Away. Seal Away, that's the one. It's not amazing. 1 out of 5. It potentially gets better depending on what comes up in the next sets. Saheeli, Sublime Artificer, 1 and 2 isn't hybrid for 5. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell in general, you get a 1/1 servo. And then -2, target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until the end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. This is great. I think it goes in kind of in control decks maybe to make servos. It probably goes in like the is it in maybe in the Tesserator deck or something? Just I assume you're casting a lot of non-creature spells as artifacts. So yes, you're going to generate a bunch of servos a little bit quicker. It contends with Sai, and Sai draws you cards. So maybe this goes along Sai as a 1 of or 2 of, but it's about it. It's pretty decent though. I still see it being played in some places, so it's a 3 out of 5. And then lastly, Samit Tyrant Smasher, 2 and 2 Rule Hybrid mana for 5. Creatures you control have haste, and -1 target creature gets +2/+1 and has haste until the end of turn. And then Scry 1. I don't understand that ability at all. If creatures you control already have haste, and then the -1 gives it +2/+1, and then gives it haste, and then you Scry 1, I don't understand it. Doesn't make sense. Like, it would make sense to give it trample, but maybe that's too powerful. That's really weird, man. That's a really weird ability. It doesn't see play anywhere, though. It's 1 out of 5 for sure. Okay. And then just really quickly, the last here to look at the uncommon Planeswalker arts here. I think my favorites out of this, Saheeli, Nahiri, and Narset, Kasmina, Teo, Vraska. There's a bunch of them. These are all really good. I really like these a ton. These are super sweet. So, but yeah, that's all for that we had for today, folks. So thank you guys so much for watching. We will be live tomorrow, the 25th of April, when the set goes live on Magic Arena, to crack some packs and build some decks and have some fun. So definitely stop by and check that out. The Twitch is in the description below. Thanks you guys so much for watching. Leave some comments, smash the like button, all that jazz, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.